Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. If you're interested or if you're planning on taking my advanced hand planing and sharpening workshop, I want to demonstrate or at least show you the tools that you're going to want to have. I also did this because I want to be able to explain what to avoid and what to look for. When I talk about advanced hand planing, what I'm talking about is we're going to learn to take a rough board like this and process it to be flat, smooth, and square on all 6 surfaces like this. Well, it starts here with the sharpening, and I've used a lot of different methods over the years. I'm constantly looking for something that's faster, better in terms of the end result, and cheaper. This is what I've been using for the last 5 or 6 years, and this is what I've found to date to be what I consider to be the best. And what's really great about this is my sharpening method takes just over a minute, just over half a minute, sorry. I start off with a trend diamond plate. This is a steel plate with diamond embedded on both sides. You have a 1,000 grit on one side, a 300 grit on the other. My finishing stone is a Shapton 16,000. Now this is the stone. It's called a glass stone. I scraped some of the crud off. You'll see what I mean. It's ceramic stone attached to a piece of glass. Keeps it nice and flat. And that's sitting on what they call their heavy holder. And it gets fastened on there with just the crud that builds up after multiple sharpenings. And then I use a little thin steel rule, the David Charlesworth ruler trick. You're going to want to have one of these. It's a 1/2 inch by 1/6 inch, and it's just maybe a millimeter, and actually it's less than a millimeter thick. So that's my sharpening system. Now the only other thing I add to this, it's not here, is Hone-Right, which is a water additive that prevents water from rusting the steel plate, and yet it's safe to use on the ceramic stone as well. All right, so let's get into the planes. Now this can be a bit intimidating, but these are the tools that you're going to eventually need anyway. Now there is an either or in here, and that's these two. This is a 5.5, this is the 4.5. I prefer the half sizes for an adult male hand. The rear tote or rear handle is larger. It's got a wider footprint. It has a 2 3/8 inch wide blade. Now you want to note this. This plane, the 4.5, this plane, the 5.5, this plane, the number 7, and the number 6, which is called a 4 plane, all of the parts are interchangeable. Same lever cap, chip breaker, blade, front knob, rear tote, frog, everything. All these parts are interchangeable. So if you want to have what we call a high angle blade, one blade you can then use in any of those 4 planes. But you don't need to bring both of these, just one or the other. My preference would be actually the 5.5 because it works exceptionally well on the shooting board. I'll show you what I mean momentarily. All right, let's start down this end. First thing we're going to do is take that rough board, and we need to get it cleaned up to the point where we get rid of all the really twisted spots. And we're going to use something called a scrub plane. Scrub plane has a really thick blade, big opening, and it's designed, it can be used easily with one hand because of the large rear tote, but you can also use 2, but it'll remove a lot of wood quickly, rather coarse. Once you've done the scrub plane, then you're going to come in and use your jointer. Your jointer has a long 22-inch sole, and that will ride off all of the high spots, helping to bring them down to one level. And then if that doesn't give you the finish that you want, you can come in with your 5.5 or your smoother, and you can get that final finish. So those are the planes that you're going to use. Now I do have the block plane here as well. Very good for doing end grain, but it's also, I consider it an essential plane because it's a one-handed tool. If you're needing to chamfer an edge or any application where one hand is preferred, this is the one you're going to want. Now as far as measuring tools, you're going to want a square. I use my 6-inch combination square. I just find it to be extremely handy. You'll be using that for checking the edges when you're going in to process the edge or the end of the board. Your marking gauge, you use your marking gauge to establish the thickness, the final thickness of the board, and you would use that to scribe a line from your reference face, which is the first one that we do. You would scribe a line all the way around the perimeter of the board, and then you would simply plane down to that line, and you have a board that is uniform thickness throughout. Now, over here, these may not be quite as common to you. These are what are called winding sticks. You can make them yourself. There's a few places that actually sell them. I provide them as well. Winding sticks are set on the board, and what you do is you set one on one end with the white inlay at the back. This one sits on the front. Then you sight down the top edge, and it helps determine if there's any wind or twist. It simply exaggerates that wind or twist, and those white pieces up against the forward piece will help determine where that wind or twist is and helps you get rid of it. Keep going. Next is our panel gauge. What we use the panel gauge for, if you can imagine, it's like a big marking gauge. But the way we use it is we would, after we have straightened an edge, we would go in and free up this wedge, and that's the way I use mine. Set it for the thickness that we want, measuring from the cutter to the inside edge of this rabbet. Once you get that set at the dimension, you set it back in place, and then referencing off of the straight edge, you would go ahead and run a line on the opposite side that you would then plane down to get your final width. Okay, now lastly, I want to just introduce you to the shooting board and the reason why I like the 5.5. The shooting board is probably the most beneficial shop-made implement that you'll ever have. Once you've learned to use a hand plane, this will take up the level of your work quicker than anything else. Shooting board is designed to hold the workpiece and the tool at right angles. Right angles this way and right angles this way. What you want in a shooting board is something that is long enough that if you're hitting the edge of a wide board, you have to maintain contact out here with the toe. And the more distance you have between the blade and the toe, the more of a run you can get at the board before you actually engage it. Shooting a smoother just doesn't have nearly enough mass, and it's not long enough. However, because I use this for most of the work on my bench, I like it to be of a manageable size. So you may look at the number 7 and say, wow, this would be the best tool for shooting board because it has the longest distance and it's the heaviest. However, if I'm only going to have one plane, this would be that's rather awkward to be using for general purpose on the bench. So you want something that is long enough on the shooting board, but not so long that you can't easily use it. And you want something with enough mass that will help carry through that cut. And that's why I choose the 5.5. So if you're looking for one general purpose plane to cover the smoothing task, I would choose the 5.5. 4.5 would be a close second, however. Okay, that's the tools. Look forward to seeing you in the class.